Huntsville, Texas, April 23rd, 2025. As dust settled over the walls of Huntsville unit, an unsettling quiet fell inside the death chamber. The only sound, barely audible, was the sharp hiss of a needle breaking skin. Moments later, Moises Mendoza, once a name that haunted a Texas town, was no more. He was 41, executed by lethal injection. For many in Farmersville, his death brought closure, but it also reopened wounds that had never fully healed. Today, we journey back to uncover the full scope of a tragedy that began over 2 decades ago. From Mendoza's final moments, his last meal, his final words, to the crime that shattered an entire community, this is the story of how a bright young man with every opportunity lost his way and destroyed an innocent life in the process. Her name was Rachel O'Neal Tolson. Just 20 years old, a new mother, a woman trying to rebuild her life after divorce, with nothing but love for her 6-month-old daughter, Avery. Friends described her as strong, nurturing, and determined to create a better future. Her world revolved around Avery. Every diaper change, every late-night lullaby, every whispered dream of the life they'd build together. But on March 18, 2004, that future vanished in a single night. Rachel's mother arrived that morning to check in. The door to the house was ajar. Baby Avery was inside, alone and crying. But Rachel was gone. The bedroom told the story before the investigators did. The bed was torn apart, the headboard damaged, papers, clothing, furniture, all thrown into chaos. Something violent had happened here. This wasn't a break-in. This was a personal, terrifying act of destruction. Soon, the worst fears were confirmed. Rachel had been kidnapped, raped, and strangled. Her body was later found burned, likely in an attempt to hide the evidence of the crime. A young mother, targeted and killed in a way that was as deliberate as it was savage. And the man responsible? Moises Mendoza. Born in Mexico on January 26, 1984, and raised in North Texas, Mendoza had once been seen as a success story. Bright, driven. In high school, he'd even attended classes with Rachel. Teachers remembered him as smart, even winning academic scholarships. He trained in HVAC after graduation and seemed set for a stable life. But appearances can be deceptive. Long before the murder, those close to him had seen flashes of something darker, buried rage, uncontrollable outbursts. One incident in particular stuck in the memory of neighbors. Mendoza violently pinning down his own mother and sister in broad daylight. Still, no one imagined just how far he would eventually fall. By 2003, he was spiraling, arrested for 2 armed robberies at Dallas College's Richland campus. When Rachel disappeared in 2004, Mendoza was out on bail. Even more disturbing, just days before her murder, he had been inside Rachel's home, attending a small party with about 15 others. Was this calculated? Or the impulsive act of a man already unhinged? This video isn't just about a murder. It's about what leads someone to commit the unthinkable. It's about the red flags we miss or ignore. And it's about a mother, a daughter, and a future that was stolen in a single, terrifying night. Stay with us, because the next part of the story only gets darker. March 18, 2004, Farmersville, Texas. A town known for quiet streets and close-knit families was about to be shaken to its core. That night, something unthinkable happened. While 6-month-old Avery lay sleeping in her crib, her mother, 20-year-old Rachel Tolson, was taken from the safety of her own home. The back door was unlocked. She never saw the danger coming. Prosecutors would later say the man who entered that house was no stranger. Moises Mendoza, someone Rachel once knew from high school, walked in like he belonged. That familiarity gave him access, and what followed would become one of the most disturbing crimes in Farmersville's history. Mendoza would later offer a different version of events, claiming they left the house together, that Rachel willingly got into his car to go buy cigarettes. But that story unraveled quickly. According to Mendoza's own testimony, something snapped inside him while they were driving. Without provocation, he turned violent, his hands around Rachel's neck until she lost consciousness. This wasn't heat-of-the-moment rage. This was cold calculation disguised as chaos. And the nightmare didn't stop there. After rendering Rachel unconscious, Mendoza drove to a remote field near his home. There, in the cover of night, his violence escalated into something even darker. He sexually assaulted her. Then, as if to erase any trace of humanity, he strangled her again. this time to death. Just to be certain, he took a knife and slashed her throat, a final act of unspeakable brutality. What followed was as haunting as the crime itself. He didn't try to hide the body right away. Days passed. Rachel's lifeless form was left abandoned in that desolate field, while her family and friends desperately searched for answers. It was as if Mendoza needed time to think, to plan, or perhaps just to feel in control. Eventually, he returned, this time with a tarp. He wrapped her remains, transported them to his cousin's property, and set the body ablaze, hoping flames would erase what he'd done. But it didn't end there. Mendoza dumped what was left into a nearby creek, believing he had covered his tracks. But evil leaves traces. That same morning, March 18th, Rachel's mother had gone to check in on her. What she found was every parent's worst nightmare. Avery alone, Rachel gone, the house in disarray, the bedroom torn apart. The moment police arrived, they knew this wasn't just a missing persons case. Something horrible had happened. Search teams scoured the area, flyers went up. Locals held their breath. And then, 5 days later, March 23rd, a burned body was discovered in a creek not far from where Mendoza lived. Forensic examiners used dental records to confirm what everyone feared. It was Rachel. The condition of her body revealed a level of violence and intent that was hard to comprehend, even for seasoned investigators. The very next day, police made their move. March 24, 2004, Moises Mendoza was arrested. The tipping point came from a conversation he didn't think anyone would take seriously. He'd confessed to a friend, admitted to killing Rachel. That slip, combined with damning forensic evidence and witness accounts, painted a clear picture of guilt. And when investigators learned Mendoza had recently been at Rachel's house, attending a small gathering just days before the murder, it became chillingly obvious. He had been studying his victim, earning her trust, waiting. The police, prosecutors, and forensic experts in Collin County worked in tandem to bring justice to Rachel's memory. But it left the town grappling with one disturbing question. Did Mendoza ever truly believe he could get away with it? Or did he simply not care? This wasn't just a crime. It was a betrayal, a calculated, heartless destruction of someone who once knew him. And that makes it all the more terrifying. The courtroom in Collin County, Texas was packed in 2005. Everyone knew the name Moises Mendoza, and no one came without an opinion. It wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. The charges, capital murder, kidnapping, rape, and theft, all tied to the brutal killing of Rachel Tolson, a young mother whose tragic end had already left a scar on the town of Farmersville. The prosecution, led by Greg Davis, didn't hold back. Piece by piece, he laid out Mendoza's past like a mosaic of violence and cruelty. Davis brought up past incidents that chilled the room, Mendoza's attacks on his own mother and sister, and even more disturbing, a prior rape of a 14-year-old girl. Neighbors and former acquaintances were called to the stand, one after another. Their stories painted a grim portrait of a man who had long been spiraling, someone volatile, impulsive, and dangerously unpredictable. A man who wore a mask of normalcy, hiding the darkness underneath. But it was the forensic evidence that drove the point home. DNA traces, crime scene details, and the condition of Rachel's body, painfully described in the courtroom, left little room for doubt. The defense tried to push back. They called psychologist Mark Vigan to the stand, who painted Mendoza as emotionally stunted, psychologically unstable, and incapable of controlling his temper under pressure. He described a man who lashed out when challenged, who manipulated those around him for sport. But for the jury, none of that erased the horror of what Mendoza had done. They didn't deliberate long. On June 29, 2005, the verdict was unanimous: death. The judge agreed and handed down the ultimate sentence. Prosecutor Greg Davis didn't mince words. He called Mendoza one of the most violent and brutal individuals he had ever prosecuted in his entire career. Rachel's family sat quietly in the courtroom as the sentence was read, the weight of justice finally delivered. But even with that sentence, the hole left behind by Rachel's death wasn't something a gavel could fill. The pain, especially for her mother Pam, was deeper than any legal outcome. Fast forward 20 years. April 23, 2025, Huntsville Unit Prison. At 41 years old, Moises Mendoza entered the execution chamber. The man who had once sparked fear and outrage in Farmersville was now calm, quiet, even reflective. In the hours leading up to his execution, Mendoza chose a final meal steeped in memory. Tacos al pastor, roasted pork, marinated with pineapple and onion, a bowl of sopa de fideo, just like the kind his mother once made, and a cold, creamy horchata to wash it all down. It was less about indulgence, more about closure. One last taste of home. Then came the moment. Strapped to the gurney, Mendoza delivered a final message. He apologized to his daughter and to the family of Rachel Tolson. In a brief statement read after his death, he admitted that nothing he could say or do would ever make up for the life he took. In Spanish, he sent love to his sister's wife and two close friends. Los amo. Siempre estoy con ustedes. Estoy bien y en paz. I love you. I'm always with you. I'm fine at peace. 19 minutes after the injection was administered, Moises Mendoza was pronounced dead. The room was silent. Among the few witnesses was Pam O'Neill, Rachel's mother. She didn't speak immediately afterward, but later she told reporters, "He was on death row for 20 years. Today is the end. He died without pain. I wish I could say the same about my daughter's death. It was over, but the ache remained." For Farmersville, the story had finally reached its conclusion. But for those who loved Rachel, who knew her laughter, her warmth, her dreams, it would never be just a headline or a verdict. It would always be the story of what was taken and what could never be returned. The story of Moises Sandoval Mendoza isn't just about one man's horrific actions. It's about the aftershocks that violence sends through families, through neighborhoods, through time itself. Rachel Tolson wasn't just a name on a headline. She was a mother, a daughter, a woman who had dreams, who loved deeply, who sang lullabies to her baby girl and hoped for better days. When her life was stolen, it didn't just end a future. It shattered a family and left a child motherless. Her daughter Avery will grow up with only photographs and stories, her laughter replaced with silence, her milestones marked without the woman who gave her life. And while justice in the legal sense may have been served, that gaping wound never really closed. Rachel's father, Mark O'Neill, never forgave the man who murdered his daughter, but he did something remarkable. He expressed sympathy for Mendoza's own mother and sisters, who through no fault of their own had to bear the weight of his choices. They too lost someone that day. But Mark stood firm in one belief. Mendoza ignored Rachel's cries, showed no mercy, and should have faced the consequences long ago. After Mendoza's execution, Collin County District Attorney Greg Willis addressed the public. He said Rachel's death had left a permanent scar on the community, that the death sentence wasn't about revenge, it was about honoring Rachel's memory, about closure, even if only partial, for a grieving family. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton echoed that sentiment. He vowed to keep enforcing justice, to make sure those who take innocent lives are held accountable. But here's where the story grows more complicated, because it doesn't just end with a verdict or an injection. Mendoza's case forces us to confront a much larger question, one that hangs over every courtroom where a death sentence is handed down. Does capital punishment truly deliver justice, or does it replicate the very cycle of violence it claims to condemn? What happened to Mendoza? How did a young man once praised for academic success and potential spiral into such darkness? Could society have spotted the signs sooner, intervened earlier, saved two lives instead of losing both? These questions don't come with easy answers. And then there's the debate itself, a national conversation that grows louder with every passing year. Rachel's murder and Mendoza's execution were both featured in crime documentaries like Forensic Files and Solved, not just to recount what happened, but to serve as a chilling reminder of how fragile life is, of how one act of violence can echo forever. But even now, people are divided. Some see Mendoza's execution as necessary, justice served. Others, like Jamila Hodge, the CEO of Equal Justice USA, see it differently. In an interview with Newsweek, she said, "The death penalty is not justice. It doesn't heal families. It doesn't deter crime. It deepens suffering, wastes public resources, and upholds a system that unfairly punishes the poor and marginalized." Her words are backed by numbers. Since 1973, over 200 people sentenced to death have been exonerated. And states that have abolished the death penalty, They often report lower murder rates because they've redirected resources into mental health, community safety, and prevention. As Hodge put it, it's time to end the death penalty in America. So now we ask you, where do you stand? Was Moises Mendoza's execution justice or just another chapter in an endless cycle of loss? Should the death penalty remain, or is it time to choose a different path? Let us know in the comments. This isn't just about one case. It's about what kind of society we want to be, and whether we believe that justice should ever come with a needle.